So welcome everyone to the latest in the series of the development and support webinars delivered by the NIHR Academy. My name is Martine Scannell and I work in the NIHR Academy as the Development and Support Manager. This webinar, Leading with Agility to Strengthen Hybrid Working, is delivered in collaboration between NIHR Academy and Oak Ridge, one of our Leadership Development Programme partners. This webinar will be facilitated by Mark Blanchard and Joe Clare, both senior consultants at Oak Ridge, who have extensive experience in behavioural and cultural change and are passionate about helping people and teams to achieve their full potential. So Joe, I'll now hand over to you.
Thank you, Martine. It's actually Mark you're handing over to.
Sorry, Mark. Mark, I'll now hand over to you. There we go.
Thank you.
Enjoy.
That's great. Thank you very much, Martine. And hi, everybody, and welcome to this afternoon. We're going to be talking about agility from a leadership perspective in the context of working in hybrid environments. So different things that we used to do when everyone's in the same room or a semi-dispersed team. Now there's additional challenges. So hopefully you will share some hints and tips, and you'll get some tips for improving your agility. Before we start, just some logistics. Everybody's on mute, but we would encourage we're keeping an eye on the chat. So for any technical issues you have, then you can always put those in the chat. But also, if you've got any comments as we go along, we have some polls. If you want to ask any questions, then please put those in the Q&A, and we'll cover those at the end of the session today. But any comments you have, responses, anything you want to share, then please share those through the chat, and we'll try and pick those up through the session today as well. Have a pen and paper ready, take down any notes, anything that you go, oh, that's interesting. And remember, it's been recorded today. So if you miss anything, then you can get the recording from the YouTube channel, which will be posted later. If you know any colleagues who couldn't make it today, then you can direct them to the YouTube. So today, we're going to cover how to develop an agile leadership mindset, so focus on agile leadership, ways to help you transform your team to working new ways of working within a hybrid context, and look at approaches to building agility into the design and culture of your organization. So first of all, just kind of clarify what we mean by agile, because many people have different perceptions of what agility means and what agile means. So what we mean by agile, and this is a quote from McKinsey, and the key things to kind of pull out of this are it's around customer centricity. So instead of focusing on how something is done to optimize operational processes, agile organizations really focus on understanding the needs of customers and creating customized solutions to address those needs. It's kind of an outcomes versus an inputs orientation for an organization. It doesn't mean that efficiency and prudent spending and value for money aren't important. They are really important for organizations. But these come as a result of creating value for customers. So it's just an orientation around that customer centricity. Also, agility talks to a network of teams. So while agile organizations maintain traditional top-down hierarchical kind of structures, the remainder of the organization is essentially a system of autonomous network teams, all with a shared purpose and a vision. And the shared purpose enables an organizational culture that focuses on its people by investing in their development. That's really building a real strong community of really empowered staff. And that's kind of characterized by agile organizations. And having inspiring leadership and people-centric organizational cultures is key to connecting staff to the organization's vision and purpose. It's that characteristic of an open communication, really good communication links. So adopting transparent and open styles of communication make it really easy for teams and individuals to get the information that they need to make the best decisions. It also allows them to do so much more at a faster rate than they would do in a kind of a traditional hierarchical bureaucratic system. A key challenge here for hybrid teams, remember the context is hybrid working, is that it's likely that the whole team is never ever going to meet face to face. So more effort and more thinking needs to be thought about in terms of how to ensure that effective communication and those smooth communications channels to allow that knowledge to be transferred seamlessly. Agile organizations are characterized by the fast learning and decision cycles. So in order to respond to unpredictability and ever-changing environments and doing that quickly, Agile organizations have short learning, product development, and decision cycles. And this allows them to make continuous, small, and focused changes that incrementally add value. So the organizations get away from having a 5-year plan that you stick to until you kind of get to the end of it. It's having those incremental changes through in order to be able to address the needs at the end, but also be able to adapt to an ever-changing environment and challenges. And the last thing really is around a seamless integration of technology. So technology is a key driver to becoming agile and more agile. So simply the rather digitalizing existing processes. So it's not just about automating existing things. Agile organizations strive to truly integrate these new technologies into their operational processes and practices. So new collaboration, communication, management tools. So we've been introduced to many new different tools over the past 18, 24 months. So they introduce new ways of working together and managing projects, but also they save a lot of time, so it becomes more effective and more efficient. But it's about adopting and embracing new technology and how that can help an organization become more agile. This is especially important with the hybrid working, and it's really that adoption and effective use which can really help drive agility. So on the subject of drivers to become more agile, so we have recognizing very quickly changing environments, lots of different things. It's not just pandemics that are changing that, but lots of different things are happening in our operating environment. Constant introduction of disruptive technology. You almost don't have time to, I don't know about anybody else, but with kind of social media stuff, is that when a new app comes out, I haven't really had time to adopt the previous version, and now there's a new version. So you can imagine that's a huge challenge when there's always something new or something new. You never really get to really use the old thing before there's something new. Accelerating digitalization and democratization. So this is access to the best information, which leads to the best decisions being made and developing the best solutions. However, the democratization thing is that the increased volume of information we have access to and how you make information transparent and available to those who need it can be a huge challenge. It's just not the technology, but the technology has meant that we have access to a much wider pool of information. And it really kind of characterized by that multi-directional communication that comes from lots of different places in complex collaboration with stakeholders. So within public health, working with that complex stakeholder environment as well. And the last kind of drive of things that are driving the need for agility is the new war for talent. So learning-based tasks are becoming more important for staff. Organizations need a distinctive value proposition to attract and retain the best talent, which is often coming from much more diverse backgrounds. A key challenge within a hybrid working environment is that people don't have to be in the office all the time. They don't have to be in the lab. They don't have to be in the work environment all the time. And that means you can attract talent from wider reaches, but it also means other organizations can attract that same talent pool. So how do you pull yourself above everybody else and create that real good value proposition? And bearing in mind these learning workers or learning staff often have much more diverse origins, thoughts, composition, and experience, and have different desires and aspirations and career aspirations and what they want out of life. So with regards to those 4 drivers, we're just going to run a poll now. So Joe, could you open poll number 1 for us, please?
Hi, yes, I've opened that poll now, so hopefully people can see it on the screen. I can see people starting to participate. Which of the following do you see as most important as drivers of change for you? So quickly evolving environments, that constant introduction of disruptive technology, digitalization's impact on information access, and attracting and retaining staff. So we're getting some good participation now. We'll leave it open for a few more minutes, seconds even. So we're up to about 74%. So just give you the last few seconds to complete it, and I'll end the poll now. Thank you. So here we go. We've got quickly evolving environment, 62%, top of the pop, and of course perhaps no surprise given what we've all experienced in the last 2 years. The talent, retaining of talent, of course, attracting and retaining staff at 41%. Then the impact of digitalization on information, 23%. And of course, that disruptive technology, 10%. And I think to some extent, maybe some of us are finding that as a real benefit over the last 2 years as well. Some opportunities that have come from that, as well as some of the challenges that come with it too. So thanks for that, Mark.
Great stuff. Thank you, Jo. Yeah, it's the reflection for me is also that the ever-changing environment means that how we did things before, they're no longer valid, they no longer work effectively, and if you just keep trying to do the same things, it becomes more difficult to do that. So hence they become a driver for being more agile. But it's all very well saying that, it's kind of saying, well, what does that mean, and what can help me become more agile? Thank you. Okay. So just briefly, benefits of agility or agile leadership. So if we have a driver to becoming more agile, then one aspect of that is looking at agile leadership. So some benefits of those are increased responsiveness at all levels of organizations. So when I talked before about agile organizations still have a structure, but within that structure that is kind of networked, and with the flexibility of those networks working as they need to. And that means the benefit of that is increased responsiveness to things, shorter decision making cycles, making incremental changes as things change in the environment. So naturally, positivity of that is increased responsiveness. And increased energy. So working in agile environments creates more staying power in the staff, creates an increased energy in the group. People being challenged with meaningful activities and improves motivation. That increasing communication and having better communication between teams and also within teams enables that information to move much faster, which then underpins your faster decision making. And ultimately increased engagement and motivation, which I mentioned before, into a kind of, if you've got that energy, increased energy within the groups, that comes from increased engagement and motivation in, being really into the projects and doing something that people feel is meaningful for them. The 3 key areas which kind of underpin that increased engagement and motivation are increased autonomy. So agile leadership and agile organizations is typified by increased autonomy within the groups, a belonging. People feel much more belong much more to the organization, and overall an increased competence and a confidence of they're doing something they're skilled at. But this means that we need to change the paradigm. So where we are now may not be fit for purpose to get us where we need to be in the future. So organizations must change from being rigid machines that are built to do things a limited number of ways in an efficient way. So a limited number of efficient ways of doing things in order to develop the output, and move much more towards being like organisms that adapt and change to the changing environment. And in McKinsey's article from 2018, which was Leading Agile Transformation, the New Capabilities Leaders Need to Build 21st Century Organizations, catchy title, they suggest that surviving and thriving in today's complex and ever-changing environment is dependent on fundamentally transforming the way organizations operate to become one that is agile. And this requires a fundamentally different approach to leadership, which is really our key focus today. Now, it's unrealistic to expect you can change the world in a day or overnight. You're going to change the organization from a non-agile one to an agile one. And we don't profess that that moving to an agile organization is easy, because it's not. Especially for those organizations that operate in highly complex, highly regulated sectors such as public health. However, change can happen, and we sincerely believe that change can happen from anywhere within an organization. It doesn't just have to come down from the top, and it can start within particular project teams and particular groups, and it can start with you by developing your agile leadership skill set, so you can actually get the benefits of being an agile organization, even just within your project team, even though you may feel you're constrained by the organization. And by making these small changes in the way that teams work to become more agile, you can do your bit to kind of turn the super tanker into a speedboat, which is kind of some of the analogies of moving from traditional organizations to agile is the super tanker to the speedboat. So first of all, leaders can develop their mindsets and behaviors to be much more attuned to being agile. Once they've done that, is that they can then transform their teams to work in these new ways. And third, then they start to contribute to building the capabilities to transform a whole organization by building agility into the design and culture of the whole. So now I'm going to hand over to Joe, who's going to take a deep dive into these three areas.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. So yes, we're going to look at step one first, and this is so very much within our control. Of course, it's our own mindset and attitude to leadership, and starting with the mindset of an agile leader. We see that there are shifts that are required and actually can be quite challenging to make. So it kind of takes practice and habit building. First, we look at a shift from a reactive mindset to a creative mindset. So rather than reacting to problem solving and issues that come up, it's more around looking for opportunities and possibilities. We're moving from a mindset of certainty to one of discovery. So really trying to foster innovation and experimentation. And I think it's that experimentation that is so critical in terms of the leadership style and behaviours and ways of working that can really help with this agile shift. From authority to partnership. So this is moving from the directing and managing to collaborating, working together autonomously to solve complex issues and take advantage of opportunities that have been identified. So less hierarchical line management structures, more collaboration and working together. From scarcity to abundance. So this is kind of fostering much more in value creation, so recognizing growth and potential available rather than focusing in on that current proposition. Thinking about patient centricity, as Mark talked about before, thinking about the aspect of the customer centricity and translating that into patient centricity, looking at entrepreneurship within our spheres of control and influence. Inclusion, of course, we've talked about the need for diversity and recognizing that sense of belonging, so helping people feel included so that they can co-create, they can bring ideas and opportunities to the table. So we've got another poll for you. So Mark, are you able to open our poll 2?
Yep. So which aspect do you think you need to shift the most in you? So just one choice for this one.
Yeah. And again, it'd be great to hear any of your thoughts and comments coming through the chat about this, recognizing that to some extent we have had to be forced into some of this mindset over the last 2 years, but recognizing what's been helpful for you to help you shift. And whilst we're waiting, Mark, what's been most helpful for you from your experience in terms of shifting into being a more agile leader?
I think going from probably certainty to discovery. So rather than needing everything to be certain, actually looking for changes and not thinking things are set in concrete.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, we've got 78%, so just give a few more seconds. You got any more? 83, 2, 1. Great stuff. Right, we'll share the results. So we have 39%, so reactive to creative. Certainty to discovery is next. Scarcity to abundance being third, and authority to partnership being the lowest from the group today.
Oh, that's good to see, actually, isn't it? That authority to partnership is perhaps something that, again, we've had to shift to, not only from an organisational need generally, but also in what we've been dealing with in the last 2 years. So great to see that. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and sharing your choice. Thinking about this mindset is so important, because how we do think affects, of course, how we feel, and then how we feel affects how we behave and how we act. So if we can get our mindsets into the right place and keep this agile mindset front of mind, we can help encourage others to have that mindset too. And we know when people are facing new, different things, it's difficult. So recognizing that and helping our teams to have that mindset can be really beneficial. So let's look at step 2. How do we transform our teams to work in new ways? And as I mentioned, we're finding change difficult generally as human beings, partly because of the way that we've been programmed. We love stability, certainty, simplicity, and clarity in our lives. It gives us comfort. Things are within our control. We know what's coming. We can plan. But we also know that the world we live in isn't stable and certain, and very much characterized by volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And of course, you may have already come across this. We've talked about it a number of times on our webinars, our VUCA world. But of course, this challenge that it throws up, the world we live in and the way that we like to be as human beings, adds much more complexity. And of course, the hybrid world is bringing even more challenge. And so encouraging the agility can be really difficult. So what can we do? When we're faced with these VUCA situations, we feel uncomfortable. When we feel uncomfortable, we want to protect ourselves, and we have that natural fight or flight response. And we do it by kind of sticking with what we know. We look for solutions that feel safe. So we're kind of perhaps going back into that certainty mind, rather than going into the opportunity, more reactive than creative. We choose to work with people that we trust. We withdraw from things that feel difficult and avoid the things that we don't really know and understand. And so this shift of working really creates even more VUCA. And how can we practically work together to be more innovative, creative, and productive, to enable ourselves to be more agile? First of all, thinking about a lack of clarity, if we can provide more clarity. Secondly, habits that we've developed ourselves as regards our own preferences and mindset and organisational culture, how we have experienced change in the past. The fear, we've already covered, of course, and that lack of accountability, taking responsibility for our own actions and decisions. So we need to help our team feel more comfortable with change, adapt to new ways of working quickly. So building agility and confidence to change. And we recommend really keeping a focus on 3 aspects. So focusing on the processes to be agile. How do we work together in a way that encourages adaptability, delivers the tasks, keeping a focus on outcomes and learning to adapt and evolve, and helping people be more open to change. We can facilitate this through key leadership skills, so skillful influencing and encouragement, involvement, allowing people to try things out, get involved, step their toe in the water and get more comfortable, and keeping that communication key, regular, carefully considered. How do we maintain those communication lines? So it's two-way communication. We can do this by having a preference for one of these aspects. So we might be much more comfortable focusing on process. We might be much more comfortable focusing on task and focusing on people. But where do we put our motivations and value on, and how can we make sure we're focusing on all three to keep that complex ability to manage our agility and our agile approach? So we've got a model to share with you that may be useful for you, and this is the AdCar model, and it gives us some practical steps throughout a problem to think about some practical actions that we can help overcome these barriers to change. And so it's presented as a linear model, a change that has a neat start, beginning and end. And of course, we kind of know that in real life, change doesn't always happen like that. It evolves and it changes, it's much more constant. And of course, that agility is needed to help move flexibly with that change. But if we think about our change alongside this model, we can identify which of the elements is missing and whether we need to put more energy into it. So a lack of awareness can lead, of course, to confusion. If we're not aware of what that change might be, or how we need to change, how we need to work differently, it might lead to confusion. A lack of desire would lead to resistance. So if people aren't open and wanting to make the change, aren't understanding the benefits of the new way of working, the agile way of working, then potentially that's going to lead to resistance. A lack of knowledge can often lead to that fear and anxiety we talked about. We don't know what this new world looks like and how it feels for us. We don't understand how we work in this new way. So again, thinking about providing as much information as possible, examples, allowing people to understand what it means for them, to help them reduce that fear and anxiety. The lack of ability can lead to frustration. And of course, again, it's about letting people try the new way out, experiment, see how it works for them, and get more comfortable with it, so that they get much more comfortable and used to being able to work in that way. It becomes more habitual rather than hard effort. And then, of course, that final step, lack of reinforcement. And of course, if we don't practice what we preach and reinforce new ways of working and reminding ourselves as a team, what will happen is we'll slip back into those older ways of working, and a bit of backsliding can happen. So think about how you might look at a change maybe you're delivering, something that you've needed your team to be much more agile with, and what aspects of that model do you feel you were strong in? Did you build lots of awareness and desire? Did you share knowledge? Did you enable ability and practice reinforcement? Or maybe there were some areas that were perhaps a little bit less focused, and actually did that have an impact on how agile you could be with a change that you were leading? It'd be great to hear of any thoughts or experiences in the chat, so do pop them in. And thinking again, what could you have done differently at each step to encourage more agility and openness for change? So let's have a look at the third step now. And this is our step around building agility into the design and culture of the organisation. And as Mark said, you know, we understand that sometimes the organisation that we're working in doesn't always give us that ability and doesn't necessarily support the culture we're perhaps trying to encouraging our teams. And for this aspect, it's about thinking around, you know, what is within our control and influence, what can help us from an ability to bring agile culture into the organization we're in control and have influence over. And if we want a truly agile culture, we need our teams to be comfortable and open for change. Then we need to be creating the culture where people feel comfortable to share openly, and learning is at the heart, so that we can be adaptable and agile. And this culture is described by the term psychological safety. Here is a quote from Amy Edmondson, who is a professor that's written a lot about this topic, and she describes the psychological safety being the belief that the work environment is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, that one will not be punished or humiliated for speaking up with ideas, questions, concerns or mistakes. And of course, even more critical in that hybrid environment, where people can feel isolated and not as connected to the colleagues, how can they ask for help when things go wrong? You used to perhaps be able to shout over the desk or pop into the kitchen or into somebody's office. Now they haven't got that ability anymore. So everything's much more intentional. Everything has to take place in a call rather than a kind of ad hoc conversation. So how do we create this safety? How do we create this culture? And we have a model that comes from Dr. Timothy Clark, who talks about 4 levels of psychological safety in teams. So the first level being inclusion safety. This is where people feel that need of belonging. They are able to connect. They feel accepted. And this talks about really building confidence, resilience and independence. If I do feel a sense of belonging in a team, then I'm going to be much more likely to be open with my ideas and thoughts and questions and concerns. And as a result, have that ability to be able to contribute fully to the team. Learner safety is stage 2. This is the stage that gives us that safety to feel engaged in the learning process. So we can ask questions, we can give and receive feedback, we can experiment, we can even make mistakes. Yeah, we're willing to be vulnerable here. We can take risks, we can develop our resilience. And so we need to give encouragement to learn. We need to think about when things go wrong, how do we deal with those things in an effective way? The third stage is contributor safety. So again, picking up on this ability to contribute fully as a full member of the team, using our skills and abilities, not remaining quiet, but open and contributing, leaning in with energy and enthusiasm. And when we create this kind of contributor safety, we're empowering people, we're giving a sense of autonomy, as Mark talked about before, we're perhaps helping guide them and encourage them. It's less of the managing and more of that collaboration and partnership in exchange, of course, for effort and results. And then the final stage, challenger safety. This is where people feel safe to challenge the status quo without worry that there's going to be some retaliation or that personal risk taking. Yeah, we're not going to affect our personal standing or reputation. When we create challenger safety, we're allowing people to have a different view, to exchange that view, and to be open to that in the spirit of getting to the best outcome. Before the 4 levels, there's exclusion. This is the place where people don't feel safe and don't feel included, of course. So thinking about those level descriptions I've just shared with you, I'd be really interested to hear, where do you feel that your team safety is right now? What level do you feel you have in terms of your team safety? And Mark is introducing our poll.
That's open now. And just while the poll's going, good comment by Ganesh in the chat. So universities and the NHS tend to be quite bureaucratic and often resist agile and thinking methods, which is, so, you know, there is that recognition as an organization. It could feel that these things are resisting that kind of agile change because of compliance and the complexity of the organization. So yeah, fully recognize that. And this is a kind of the super tanker versus the speedboat. But what we find is that there are certain areas which you can actually apply agile and adopt an agile mindset. So it's thinking about the environment in which you operate in and identify those areas of opportunity where you have got the freedom to operate in a more agile way. And only those small changes can make a big impact, especially around team working dynamics, the output of the team, without kind of upsetting the bigger machine.
Yeah,
so thanks, Ganesh.
Yeah, it's a really great comment, and it kind of brings to mind, I worked in a highly regulated aviation industry for some periods in my career, and again, it's when we're working to process, so pilots landing planes, they're in a process. We don't want too much innovation and creativity. We want them to kind of follow the process, but obviously in the event of an incident, that's where it's important. And even in if anyone watched Sully, the film, landing the aircraft on the Hudson, even in those minutes, matter of minutes, he was able to ask his colleague, did his colleague have any other ideas? Did it? And that is an example of agile working. Yeah, I know the process, I know the checklist, but I'm just going to check, is there anything else I've not thought about here? Which I thought really resonated for me when I heard Ganesh's comment, so thank you. Okay, what does the poll say, Mark?
The poll is, just for the poll, comment from Monica on the back of that one around making a smaller change within a team and the tendency that horizontally can kind of filter across and is adopted across, whereas it's much more difficult vertically, which we kind of talked about breaking a hierarchy. But yeah, doing something in a team, then another team looks at it and go, actually, that seems a pretty cool way of doing it. We're going to do that as well. And effectively, you build a movement within the organization, and eventually that movement helps move the supertanker to become a speedboat. But it can take a long time, but it doesn't stop you kind of adopting it and other people going, actually, I'm going to try that as well.
Yeah.
So on the subject of the poll, so we've got, let me end the poll and share the results. We have, so the contributor is the most at 29%, then equals second, inclusion and learner, and then challenge, and then exclusion we have.
Okay, good to see very low numbers there for exclusion, so that's heartening. But I guess recognizing that, and how could we perhaps create an ability to create some more safety within our teams through helping people with that sense of belonging. So let's just summarize what we've covered so far then. So we've hoped that we've helped you think about how you can lead with a little bit more agility to help navigate you and your teams into the virtual hybrid working, and of course the continuing uncertainty and ambiguity that we face. We have talked about that, developing our leadership mindset, the agile leadership mindset. We've talked about ways to transform the team and how you can help support them into transforming in a hybrid world, and thinking about how we can build approaches to agility into the culture that could support that shift in culture for the organization. So we've got lots of references for you. So for those of you that are interested to get the pack, please do have a look. This is some of the information that we gathered our thoughts from, and of course additional information about how we can build psychological safety and what we can do to transform our teams and help ourselves with our mindset. And also there's a module on the NIHR Academy Learn pages very much around this topic, so building agility and leading change, and other supportive modules like creative problem solving that might be useful for you to help build innovation into your teams. So please do take a look at that. And with that, I'd be delighted to hear from you. I think Mark and I would both be delighted to hear from you in terms of conversation, your questions around what we've talked about today. So Martine, are you able to facilitate the Q&A for us?
I certainly am, yes, and it's just a reminder as well that there's still plenty of time to add in your questions. We're starting to see some coming through, which is great. And again, just a reminder to upvote, and if you do notice any in there, if you've got any favourites. So I'll go straight in with our first question. So this is how does one build a desire? You mentioned earlier about desire, part of a team that has established structure, certain ways and rigidity.
So I think desire is a difficult one, isn't it? Because what's going to be motivational for me might be different for you, Martine. So it's really trying to tap in to what's in it for me here. Yeah, what's the thing that I'm going to be able to gain from this? And of course, then encouraging the team to think about that as well. Each individual, if we were going to try and shift to a different way of working, what would it mean for us as individuals? What are we going to gain from it? Which, as I say, will be very different depending on preferences and motivations and experience, I guess, to some extent as well. Anything from you, Mark, to add in there?
No, I think it kind of covered the three aspects of being motivated as an individual is having that clear. If you feel like you're doing something worthwhile and you can see the impact of all your efforts, then that helps kind of create that buy-in and that self-motivation, that intrinsic motivation to do everything you can and feel fulfilled through that as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. It's always an interesting subject matter, isn't it, that intrinsic motivator? So this sort of blends a little bit into the next question, talks about people being a little bit inflexible. So I do have people in my team who are very inflexible and don't want to adapt. So what can I do to bring them on board? So a similar sort of subject matter.
It's a similar kind of thing. It's change is a scary thing. I don't, some people kind of absolutely love change, but I think most people change is like, oh, it can be really difficult, and if you don't really understand the reason for the change, is that you don't buy into it because you prefer that human element of preferring what you know rather than something new where there's unknowns. I think in terms of this particular person, it's understanding what it is that's kind of holding them back. So what are they afraid of? What is it about the change which they may not understand, or they may be fearful of? And once you get to the root cause, so the kind of somebody not bought in is the kind of position you see, but actually understanding what is it that they're not comfortable with, and that's a really great first step in order to identify actually it may be just that they don't really understand what the impact is, or the positive impact is, or their role in helping make this change happen. And clarifying that, so communication is really important, could actually allay some of those fears and remove those barriers.
Yeah, and I think I'd add, again, in this spirit of agile approach, is allowing people to dip their toe in the water and try things out. So understanding that root cause, what's the real issue, and then giving them the opportunity to try things out, as opposed to being forced into doing something different, to get that traction, to get that engagement.
I think as well, if we thinking in the principles of agility is all about making incremental changes quickly. So some of the fears of some of the big organizational changes I've been through is that the change is massive, and then it's kind of set in stone for quite a long period of time, and then you've got the next change and that's set in stone. And actually agile organizations, they make the change, and if the change is not working, they make another change, so change becomes the normality. Therefore it's not such a big thing because people kind of get used to it, but it's a kind of a mindset shift away from traditional change projects which are hugely impactful for everybody and a real effort on everybody and a real drain, but then it's kind of set in stone for a period of time. So kind of I kind of think of it like that, is that the change is agile in itself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we're starting to see some really interesting questions coming through, because it can be a really hot topic. So this one is really popular. So I think the pandemic has shown that we are good at being flexible, although this has been hard on people in terms of their well-being, and how can we ensure we support them? I mean, this is really important, isn't it?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that we're perhaps facing now is actually to some extent change fatigue. And as a result of that, we can often feel quite exhausted, and there's this term called languishing that seems to be kind of, where people can't kind of find the energy to muster. And of course, other more serious situations such as burnout, which we obviously need to be really careful about. And I think it is about just giving people that chance to talk and be open. When we think about psychological safety, being able to share how we're feeling, that we're having a bad day, and actually that's okay. We're not going to beat ourselves up about that, but there are things we can do to make ourselves, help ourselves feel better. So recognizing that, being able to build the culture where you can have those conversations, so people aren't feeling like they need to be strong all the time and present themselves as strong all the time. Again, there's a great module in Learn, a resilience module in Learn, so building your resilience to manage in a kind of VUCA world. So that might give you some information around what practical activity can you do to help yourself, but also recognizing that the culture allows the conversation to take place and put steps in place as well to help.
Fabulous, thank you. And you will have seen, yeah.
Sorry,
go on, Mark.
So I was just going to, there are a couple of things in chat. So Ben said working IT projects, which is probably the traditional sector that you feel that, or industry that you feel that Agile came through when it was developed through IT, is that you get Agile principles, but actually then financial contracts can be very rigid. So it's a really good point, is that even in an area which is kind of really characterized by Agile working, is that there is still structure that can risk the level of agility. But I think you can be agile within that, but it's recognizing the impact of kind of the sector you're working in, and any constraints in terms of compliance or financials. It's great. And Ganesh, I get another comment from Ganesh, just a really good point here about plan, do, study cycles is a good way of enabling quick incremental change. So enable people to fail quickly and fail safely, and that comes back to the level of safety within the team, the psychological safety, and it's creating that. And so, if people have examples of running those study cycles, then it's a case of sharing it across the group and across your peer networks, because that's a great example of Agile working. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, some great stuff coming through. So we have another one here. So how do you move to collaborative environments but still allow people to work within their job description?
So these are kind of a kind of theme. It's all about recognizing there's a hierarchy versus this network, and we need to try and find a blend to some extent, don't we? We need to make sure the processes facilitate that agility. So recognizing that a job description is kind of helps give clarity on our roles and responsibilities, but also needs to have some flexibility built into it to recognise that there will be different activities which we get involved in. And actually that's a good thing, and it's great for our development, and we want to be able to learn and grow. So it's creating agile job descriptions to some extent to support the culture. And I think where we've again got challenge around that, if people are, well, it's not within my job description kind of challenges. It's about then understanding what the benefit would be for them, what would be helpful for them, how they could perhaps develop and grow as a result of the different way of working.
Yeah, and just on that subject matter, Joe, we've got one here again, just talking about that hierarchy. So higher management are very rigid and shoot ideas down without reason. So how would you change this or open up the topic for discussion?
Yeah, I think again we really need to be thinking about feedback here. It's a difficult situation, but if we're not being heard, then we kind of need to be able to share that. And I would be asking and challenging, you know, that the situation to open up and say, you know, can we have an opportunity to provide some thoughts and feedback on this? Is there an opportunity for us to discuss it? So using it as an opportunity to open it up for everyone, not just myself, but in the team, so that we're creating that culture where everybody can get involved, and it takes away sometimes some of that difficulty with that one-on-one upward feedback. I'm not sure if you've got any thoughts there, Mark.
Yeah, the thing that's kind of running through my mind is understanding what the higher management's expectation is of getting ideas. It may be that they're not actually asking for ideas. So from them as the recipient of the ideas, it's what is your expectation of us, and is there something about how those ideas are being presented, which is the reason that you feel like they're being shot down. I think another important thing here is if you feel like they're being shot down, then that's that's something that they may not be aware that you feel like you're being shot down, which is actually demotivating you to actually come up with any ideas. You can't make the person agree to your ideas, but there might be something in how they're expecting their expectations of you, and there's a disconnect there, which is definitely worth a conversation.
And again, that could tie into the whole culture, which ties into beautifully to the next question. So what if the culture of the organisation doesn't support an agile approach?
So we're back to kind of creating that balance between hierarchy and network, and trying to create this blend of it working together. And the way that we kind of try and help organisations to do this is thinking about creating pockets of where it's happening. I think, as Mark mentioned before, an example being, actually, if we can have this happening in our team here, and other teams might start to see what's going on, and actually that looks like they're doing great things over there, it starts to create a conversation around activity across the organisation, and of course then getting the more senior levels bought in too. So culture is obviously often affected by kind of the senior kind of view, but it can be shifted when we look at it at all levels. And of course, what goes on a day-to-day basis around here is very much the culture of the organisation. And so how do we build that into our day-to-day? How can we do that to help build a kind of groundswell of agility upwards to meet with that aspiration at the top? Anything you wanted to add, Mark?
Yeah, it's kind of looking at, you can create a culture within a culture. So there's nothing stopping you creating your own culture. If you find it, if you're working a massive, with a really big group and it's difficult to change that, there's nothing stopping you doing something personally. And it comes back to that thing of it's the small changes within an organization that which gain momentum, create a movement. And these are things that push organizations forward, because at some point the whole culture of the organization is one that is going to move in that direction, because that's kind of how cultures develop and evolve. So if the culture of the organization is not supporting an agile approach, there are things that you can do to adapt to an agile approach, which has benefits for you personally in terms of motivation and purpose and energy from the work the important work that you're doing, or within your teams in terms of the team motivation and developing and delivering their goals. You can still do that regardless of the culture of the organization in which you operate in. I'm reminded of there's a YouTube and it's called The Dancing Man. It's quite an old one, I think, from the 80s. And it's a festival in the US, and everyone's kind of sat down watching the music, and it's this guy filming the crowd, and this one person gets up and starts to dance, and everyone's kind of looking at this one person dancing and thinking, what's going on here? And it only takes about 2 or 3 minutes, and then the next person gets up, and then the next person gets up, and within about 5 minutes, everybody's dancing. So imagine you are that dancing man. It takes courage to do that. You have the psychological safety of knowing, that it's safe to do that. But it's these pioneers which change organizations, and that could be you.
Yeah, and I love that video, and if you want to look for it, just search lessons from the dancing man. I think you'll find it on YouTube. But the other thing that came to mind for me is, we've got a fantastic opportunity after this 2 years of absolute trauma and difficult times, but we have had to be agile. That's one thing it's forced us to be: flexible and adaptable and agile to some extent. So what can we do to maintain some of that agility? What can we do? What do we want to keep? What do we want to forget about? What do we want to adapt as we move into this next stage of maybe hybrid working, and recognizing the agility that we've built in already, and how can we keep some of that so we don't lose it? Recognizing how quickly we got the vaccine licensed, when normally it can take years and years and years. There was some massively agile activity going on there. How can we maintain that? How can we keep it going to some extent to help us retain that agility?
Fabulous. Yeah, so we do have one more question. This is an interesting one. So you mentioned the new war on talent. So how do you promote and advertise this new culture to attract the new staff and the talent? Then this individual can see agile environment may retain staff.
Definitely. So if you create, so you've got to kind of create that bubble. So whether it's you have an agile organization, and whenever you've been for a job interview, you get a sense as to the organization when you go and have a look around. It might be that if you've got something there which is actually, everyone's loving working here, we want to attract this new candidate for a role, is actually to take them around the office, get them to talk to other people in the office. So maybe it's having a look at your recruitment processes and see, how can you give someone a flavor to to that culture, and that's the way of doing it. Your role descriptor is very much going to be the same. It's the feel that they get when they come into the place for their interview, and it's the kind of the feel they get from when they engage with you. The kind of that they'll feel actually there's a kind of buzz here, which feels pretty cool.
I'm recognizing a lot of interviews are happening online, so perhaps people won't get that feel, but so that's about kind of conveying it. I would perhaps urge a sense of caution though. We can't kind of promise an agile culture if there isn't one, because that again would lead to a mismatch of expectation. I'm going to join this team and I'm expecting this agile culture, and actually it doesn't feel that agile. So there's something about honesty within the culture as well, and recognizing that the agility might be within your team. So this is the way I like to work with my team, but not kind of creating the view that the whole organization is like that, because that could create some lack of mismatch of expectation, and after going through the process of recruiting and selecting, you don't want people to be leaving because it's not quite what they expected.
Great, thank you. Sorry, I'm struggling sometimes to take my mute off quick enough. Right, so they're all our questions. So thank you very much. So am I okay then to now close the session? Yep.
Lovely. Thank you so much for all those great questions. We enjoyed.
Yeah, thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
And thank you, Monica, for your comments, and Ganesh.
Yes.
Yep, and can I just remind individuals as well that are still on the call, so that we do have our NIHR TV YouTube channels that are available to you, and also, as Joe's already mentioned, there's our online leadership resources and lots of events that are taking place on our events page. And thank you again, Mark and Joe, for a fabulous, interesting session. And thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Okay. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.